Let me tell you a story that every sentient being in the known galaxy has heard 1,000 times but never quite believes. My name is Jack Ryder, and I'm what the Galactic Confederation likes to call a human diplomatic anomaly. Translation: I'm the guy they send when everything else has gone spectacularly wrong. The day started like any other bureaucratic nightmare. I was sitting in the ultra-sleek, minimalist conference room of the Interstellar Diplomatic Complex on New Geneva Station, surrounded by representatives from approximately 17 different species, who all looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. Can't blame them, really. Humans have a reputation for being unpredictable. Some background might help. Humans discovered faster-than-light travel in 2089, roughly 127 years ago. Our first encounter with alien civilization wasn't some grand, orchestrated moment of peaceful connection. No, it was more like a cosmic fender bender. We accidentally dropped out of hyperspace directly into the shipping lanes of the Andromedan Trade Consortium, causing what they later described as the most expensive traffic incident in galactic history. Picture this: me, in a crisp navy blue diplomatic uniform that cost more than most alien species' annual planetary budgets, trying to look simultaneously professional and slightly dangerous. It's a delicate balance. On my right, Ambassador K. Thax from the Vroidian, clustering a methane-breathing blob of iridescent plasma contained in what looked like a high-tech fish tank on wheels, was making these subtle oscillating sounds that I'm pretty sure translated to extreme bureaucratic passive aggression. Diplomatic relations between species are a delicate matter, K. Thax burbled through the universal translator, its gelatinous form pulsing with what I recognized as condescension. Humanity's recent interventions have caused significant concern among the Confederation's founding members. I leaned back, one eyebrow raised. By interventions, I assume you mean preventing the complete genocide of the Zorn colonies? Or perhaps our unfortunate tendency to solve problems instead of filing 17 subcommittee reports. The room went quiet. Not the dramatic movie-style silence, but the kind of silence that happens when 17 different species are simultaneously calculating diplomatic damage control and wondering if I was about to do something typically human. Humans, you see, occupy a unique space in galactic civilization. We're relatively new to the interstellar scene, but we've made an impression that can best be described as chaotic neutral, with occasional bursts of weaponized compassion. Most species expected us to be one of two things when we first arrived on the galactic stage: either primitive warriors or cowering weaklings. Instead, we turned out to be something far more terrifying: problem solvers with an absolute allergy to bureaucratic nonsense and a genetic predisposition to finding creative solutions that nobody else would even consider. Take the Zorn incident, for example. The Zorn were a peaceful aquatic species being systematically eliminated by the Krell Imperium. Galactic diplomatic channels had been discussing the situation for decades. Humans? We showed up with a combination of legal maneuvers, economic sanctions, and strategically placed communication relays that essentially turned the Krell's entire economic structure inside out. We didn't fire a single weapon. We just made continued aggression economically impossible. Ambassador K. Thax's translator clicked in word. The Confederation is concerned about your species' tendency to, how do you say, wing it. I couldn't help but chuckle. We prefer the term adaptive strategic improvisation, but sure, winging it works too. The conference room was a marvel of galactic engineering: soft ambient lighting that automatically adjusted to each species' visual spectrum, chairs that morphed to provide optimal comfort for beings with anywhere from 2 to 17 appendages, and acoustic dampeners that could filter out everything from subsonic Rigelian grumbles to ultra-high-frequency Andromedan communication clicks. And here I was, about to potentially upend several centuries of carefully maintained diplomatic protocols. Just another Tuesday. Let me be crystal clear, I said, leaning forward. Humanity isn't here to cause problems. We're here to solve them. Sometimes those solutions might look unconventional. K. Thax's plasma rippled, the methane-breathing equivalent of an eye roll. Around the room, I could see the various representatives. There was Ambassador Rill from the Crystalline Nexus Collective, who looked like a chandelier that had learned to talk. Next to her, the gregarian representative, a being composed entirely of what appeared to be sentient mist, shifted nervously. These weren't just bureaucrats. These were the gatekeepers of galactic civilization, species that had maintained intricate diplomatic networks for millennia. And here we were, humans, the new kids on the cosmic block, throwing everything they knew into chaos. Little did they know, This meeting was about to become the most talked-about diplomatic event in galactic history. Not that I knew that yet. But isn't that always how the best stories start? One thing was certain by the end of this day. The galaxy was going to remember exactly why you don't underestimate a species that invented both nuclear physics and reality television in the same century. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. And by everything I mean the entire galactic perception of humanity. First contact wasn't some grand, orchestrated moment of peaceful connection. It was more like a cosmic bar fight that accidentally solved an intergalactic crisis. The year was 2089. Humanity had just successfully tested its first stable faster-than-light drive, the Hawking-Rodriguez quantum fold engine. We were excited, optimistic, and completely clueless about the galactic ecosystem we were about to stumble into. Our first interstellar journey was supposed to be a simple test run to the nearest potentially habitable system. Captain Elena Rodriguez, who I'm convinced was part adrenaline junkie, part mathematical genius, was at the helm of the RSS Prometheus. The ship was humanity's first deep space vessel, a marvel of engineering that looked like someone had taken a submarine, a stealth bomber, and a Swiss Army knife and lovingly welded them together. The Andromedan Trade Consortium didn't know what hit them. Literally. The Prometheus dropped out of hyperspace directly into the middle of a massive trading lane. Imagine the most congested highway you've ever seen, then multiply that by 1,000, add in ships the size of cities, and sprinkle in some extremely expensive and delicate cargo. That was the scene Captain Rodriguez accidentally crashed. According to the official report, which I've read about 100 times and still can't believe Rodriguez's first words upon realizing they were surrounded by hundreds of potentially hostile alien spacecraft were, "Well, this is awkward." The Universal Translator, a cutting-edge piece of technology we'd developed, struggled initially. The first communication attempts were a comedy of errors that would later be studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy as both a cautionary tale and a bizarre masterclass in accidental diplomacy. The Andromedans, who prided themselves on being the most bureaucratic species in known space, responded with what can only be described as pure administrative horror. Their lead communication officer, a being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a filing cabinet, spent approximately 22 minutes trying to file an official complaint about the spatial interruption. Captain Rodriguez, being quintessentially human, did something no other species would have considered. Instead of apologizing or attempting to explain, she noticed that one of the nearby cargo ships was experiencing a critical navigation failure. Without hesitation, she guided the Prometheus closer and used their experimental tractor beam technology to stabilize the ship. The entire trading lane went silent. Imagine a species they'd never seen before, and a ship that looked like it was cobbled together from spare parts and pure audacity, casually saving millions of credits worth of cargo without filling out a single form. The Andromedans didn't know whether to be furious or impressed. What followed was a diplomatic incident that would be discussed for generations. The Prometheus was immediately surrounded, scanned, and subjected to what can only be described as the most thorough bureaucratic investigation in galactic history. But here's the kicker: during those initial investigations, humans demonstrated something that completely blindsided the galactic community. We were simultaneously aggressive and compassionate, technologically advanced yet improvisational, rule followers and rule breakers in the same breath. The Andromedan Trade Consortium discovered that humans had accidentally developed technologies that solved problems they'd been struggling with for centuries. Our quantum communication protocols could bypass signal degradation issues. Our waste reclamation systems were more efficient than anything in their databases. Even our basic medical nanotechnology was generations ahead of their most advanced treatments. By the time the initial contact investigation concluded, instead of being treated as a threat, humans were viewed as this bizarre, unpredictable variable in galactic civilization. We weren't conquerors. We weren't submissive. We were problem solvers with an inexplicable ability to turn potential disasters into opportunities. Which, if you ask me, is probably more terrifying to a bureaucratic civilization than any weapon could ever be. Back in the present-day conference room, Ambassador K-Thax was still giving me that plasma-based look of mild contempt. Little did they know, I was about to remind them exactly why humans are not to be underestimated. After all, we're the species that turned a potential interstellar traffic violation into a diplomatic opportunity. And we were just getting started. Let's get something straight about galactic politics. It's less about grand ideals and more about an incredibly complex game of cosmic chess, where most players are too afraid to actually move their pieces. The current crisis brewing in the conference room wasn't just about humanity. It was about control. The Galactic Confederation had spent millennia maintaining a delicate balance of power, and we humans were the equivalent of a toddler with a sledgehammer wandering into a china shop. Ambassador Rill from the Nexus Collective, remember. The sentient chandelier I mentioned earlier suddenly projected a holographic display that filled the center of the conference room. Multiple star systems flickered into view, with intricate web-like connections showing diplomatic and trade relationships. The recent human interventions in the Outer Rim conflict zones have destabilized decades of carefully negotiated non-engagement protocols. Rill's crystalline structure vibrated with what could only be described as bureaucratic anxiety. I knew exactly which interventions they meant. About 6 standard galactic months ago, humanity had discovered systematic oppression in 3 separate star systems controlled by the Krell Imperium. Instead of filing reports or calling emergency sessions, we'd done something typically human. We solved the problem. We didn't use weapons. We used something far more dangerous: economic and communication infrastructure disruption. Imagine spending centuries building an oppressive system, only to have it completely dismantled by a species that essentially weaponized paperwork and communication networks. The Krell hadn't just been defeated, they'd been systematically exposed, their internal communication systems turned against them, their economic networks revealed and dismantled with surgical precision. Those interventions prevented the subjugation of over 2.3 billion sentient beings, I responded, my voice steady. I'm not sure how that qualifies as a diplomatic problem. K-Thax's methane tank bubbled aggressively. The method matters as much as the outcome. Proper channels exist for a reason. I couldn't help but laugh. Proper channels? You mean the same channels that allowed systematic oppression to continue for generations? The same bureaucratic nightmare that let entire species get erased while committees discussed potential responses. The room went silent. Humans had a unique approach to galactic problems. Where other species saw immovable obstacles, we saw puzzles waiting to be solved. Where they saw complex bureaucratic systems, we saw inefficiencies to be streamlined. The holographic display continued to spin, showing the intricate web of galactic relationships. But now there were new connection points, human-initiated diplomatic and trade routes that hadn't existed 6 months ago. We weren't just participating in the galactic ecosystem, we were actively redesigning it. Ambassador Rill's crystalline form shifted, producing a sound that translated to deep concern. The Confederation is worried about the precedent this sets. If every species started solving problems with your methods, chaos would ensue. Or I countered, actual progress might happen. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a quantum laser. Each representative was calculating, watching, waiting to see what the humans would do next. We were the wild card, the unpredictable element that could either save or destroy the carefully constructed galactic order. And honestly, we were pretty comfortable with that reputation. Little did they know we were just getting warmed up. Sometimes diplomatic crises don't explode. They implode with the precision of a quantum-engineered sledgehammer. Just as the tension in the conference room reached its peak, my communication implant, a piece of technology that made most alien communication systems look like 2 tin cans and a string, began to pulse with an incoming priority message. The holographic display flickered. Most of the alien representatives didn't notice, but I recognized the encryption signature immediately. This was not a standard communication. This was something else entirely. A series of data streams began cascading through the room's information systems. At first, it looked like random noise quantum-encrypted data packets that seemed to dance between different communication frequencies. But I knew better. Is something wrong? Ambassador Ryder, Ambassador K-Thax's methane bubbles churned with suspicion. I held up a single finger. Just a moment. The data streams were now painting a picture. Literally. Complex information was being translated into visual and auditory representations that the room's advanced systems were struggling to process. It was like watching a massive, multi-dimensional puzzle solve itself in real time. What emerged was nothing short of extraordinary. The information dump was a comprehensive expose of systematic corruption within the Galactic Confederation itself. Not just minor infractions, but massive civilization-scale manipulation that had been ongoing for centuries. Trade routes that deliberately kept certain species in economic stagnation. Communication protocols that silenced emerging civilizations. Economic structures that maintained a strict hierarchy of power. And we'd just blown the entire system wide open. The alien representatives started to realize something was happening. Ambassador Rill's crystalline structure began to vibrate at a frequency that translated to pure panic. The gregarian representative that sentient mist started to condense, a sure sign of extreme stress. What is happening? Rill demanded. I couldn't help but smile. Transparency. The data continued to flow. Every secret communication, every backroom deal, every manipulated trade agreement, all laid bare with the kind of forensic detail that would make a digital forensics expert weep with joy. We hadn't just exposed a problem. We'd provided an irrefutable, mathematically precise breakdown of systemic corruption that no amount of bureaucratic maneuvering could cover up. This is impossible, Thax burbled, its plasma form suddenly looking less confident. Welcome to humanity, I replied. We specialize in the impossible. The turning point wasn't a dramatic space battle or a grand speech. It was data. Pure, unfiltered, mathematically verified information that destroyed decades of carefully constructed political facades. In that moment, the entire power structure of the Galactic Confederation was being rewritten. And we'd done it without firing a single weapon, without launching a single ship, without even raising our voices. Just information. Just the truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a laser or a quantum cannon. Sometimes it's simply revealing exactly what's been hidden in plain sight. And humanity? We were just getting started. If you've ever wondered what complete institutional collapse looks like, let me paint you a picture. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a systematic unraveling that happens with the precision of a master watchmaker dismantling a particularly complex timepiece. The conference room transformed. What had been a carefully staged diplomatic arena now felt like ground zero of the most spectacular political earthquake in galactic history. Ambassador Thax's methane tank was practically vibrating with panic. Ambassador Rill's crystalline form had gone from a confident chandelier to something resembling a shattered wind chime. The gregarian representative that sentient mist was condensing into what could only be described as the diplomatic equivalent of a cold sweat. This cannot be allowed to stand, Thax burbled, its translator working overtime to convey the absolute desperation in its communication. I leaned back, one eyebrow raised. Allow what, exactly? The truth. The data we'd introduced wasn't just a leak. It was a complete systemic exposure. Centuries of carefully maintained power structures were being dismantled in real time. Trade routes that had deliberately kept emerging civilizations in economic stagnation were now visible for everyone to see. Communication protocols designed to silence developing species were laid bare. But here's the truly human touch: we weren't just exposing the problem. We were simultaneously providing a comprehensive framework for reconstruction. Every piece of data was accompanied by potential solutions. Alternative trade routes, transparent communication protocols, economic models that didn't rely on systematic oppression. It was like we'd not only identified the cancer in the galactic political body, but had also prepared a complete treatment plan. You've destroyed centuries of diplomatic infrastructure, Rill's crystalline form managed to translate, a note of genuine shock in its communication. I couldn't help but chuckle. No, we've created an opportunity for actual progress. The holographic displays continued to spin, now showing not just the problems, but potential pathways forward. Emerging species that had been artificially suppressed were suddenly visible. Economic networks that had been deliberately fractured were being mapped out with surgical precision. Ambassador Thax made a sound that, in any other context, might have been a laugh. And you expect us to simply accept this? Not accept, I corrected. Adapt. Evolve. The truly terrifying thing about humans, something that had become increasingly clear to the galactic community, was our ability to view systemic problems not as insurmountable obstacles, but as interesting engineering challenges. We didn't just break systems, we redesigned them. The Galactic Confederation had spent millennia maintaining a delicate balance of power through complex manipulation and strategic obfuscation. We'd just introduced the equivalent of a global reset button, not with weapons, not with force, but with information and innovative problem solving. This changes everything. The gregarian representative finally managed, its misty form now completely condensed into what looked like a very nervous cloud. I smiled. Welcome to humanity's approach to galactic civilization. We don't just participate, we recalibrate. Outside the conference room's advanced shielding, I could almost hear the collective gasp of 1,000 different civilizations realizing that everything they thought they knew about power, diplomacy, and progress was about to change. And we were just getting started. 6 months later, the galaxy looked different. Not dramatically different, no sudden utopia, no magical transformation, but different enough that everyone knew something fundamental had changed. I was sitting in my office on New Geneva Station, watching the latest diplomatic reports scroll across my holographic display. The same representatives who had looked ready to have a collective nervous breakdown during that fateful meeting were now implementing the very systems we'd proposed. Turns out, when you remove the bureaucratic barnacles from the hull of galactic civilization, things can move surprisingly quickly. The Krell Imperium had been completely restructured. Emerging species that had been artificially suppressed were now developing at exponential rates. Economic networks that had been deliberately fractured were being rebuilt with transparency that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. My communication implant pinged. It was a message from Captain Elena Rodriguez, yes, the same captain who'd started this whole cosmic adventure during our accidental first contact. She was now heading up the Interstellar Developmental Coordination Office, a position that didn't even exist 6 months ago. Paperwork is down 73%, her message read. Efficiency is up 86%, and I haven't filed a single form in 3 weeks. Heaven is real. I laughed. Typical Rodriguez. The truly fascinating thing about what we'd done wasn't the immediate changes. It was the potential. We'd essentially given the entire galactic civilization a massive software update, complete with bug fixes and performance improvements. Humanity's reputation had transformed from those unpredictable newcomers to those problem-solving maniacs who might actually save us from ourselves. Not exactly a diplomatic medal of honor, but I'd take it. Ambassador K. Thax, now working in a newly formed Transparency and Developmental Coordination Department, occasionally sent me messages that I was pretty sure were the methane-breathing equivalent of begrudging respect. The Galactic Confederation's annual report now included sections that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Sections about systemic fairness, about actual developmental support for emerging species, about communication protocols that prioritized shared growth over maintained hierarchies. We hadn't just changed a system. We'd shown an entire galactic civilization that there were alternatives to the way things have always been done. As I looked out the window at the massive space station, watching ships from 100 different species move with a new kind of coordinated efficiency, I couldn't help but smile. Humans have always been good at one thing: looking at a seemingly impossible problem and saying, "Hold my coffee. I've got an idea." And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly what the galaxy needs. The comm system chirped. Another diplomatic crisis brewing somewhere in the outer rim. I grabbed my coffee. Time to go to work.